The truth of the gospel and the freedom and salvation that comes through Jesus Christ is beautiful and attractive. And the truth will set you free, And I've watched it happen too. You see that softening of the heart and the turning the corner to a Catholic worldview that means, wow, I really can be a real servant in the kingdom here and help God save souls in my math classroom or on the football field or in the lunchroom. It works, but we have to be very patient, Brett, and we have to. I think the collaboration is really helpful, and also then modeling that hope and joy and freedom of the sons and daughters of God. It works.
Welcome to the Making Every Class Catholic podcast. I'm Dr. Brett Sockel. This podcast and community are all about equipping Catholic educators like you to approach every subject area and your entire vocation as a teacher through the lens of our Catholic faith. Each month, I sit down with inspiring guests, and together we'll explore how every classroom can become a place of faith, truth, and beauty. Thank you so much for being here. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. And if you know a fellow Catholic teacher, share this podcast with them. Let's build this community together. Welcome, everyone, to the Making Every Class Catholic podcast. I am delighted to be joined today by Father Ambrose Christ, the director of the Evermode Institute and a Norbertine priest. And so if you've ever seen the O.Praem and didn't know what that was, I've seen that one around and didn't necessarily, there's no N in that one, but that's the Norbertine. So welcome to the show, Father Ambrose.
Thank you very much, Brett. It's a joy to be here. I'm delighted to have this conversation with you.
I want to start by just sharing with our audience a little bit about how the two of us connected. A friend of mine saw a video of you on some social media platform that I'm not on, I think Instagram or something. And she knew the kind of work I was up to. And she sent me a message just saying, have you seen this? Like, this sounds like what you're doing. So I had never heard of the Evermode Institute. I had heard of the Norbertines because I had been in a, and not just in general, but your specific Norbertines, because I had been at a high school in Southern California where your community serves as chaplains.
Yes.
At J. Sarah. And so but it wasn't immediately obvious to me. I had to figure out that these are the same Norbertines, right? And I watched a couple of videos. I said, these people are doing not exactly what I'm doing, but we're like neighbors. We're working neighboring plots in the vineyard.
Exactly.
Was kind of the impression. So I said, well, I got to reach out to them and find out more about what they're doing and see if they know about what I'm doing. So I sent you an email, and you were very gracious and even enthusiastic in your response. And so I said, well, we got to have you on the show and share with our audience the work that you're doing and your brothers at the Evermode Institute, and then think a little bit about how that relates to the work we do here at Making Every Class Catholic. So maybe start by just sharing a little bit about yourself, how you came to this work, where you live, your community, and then maybe we can go into some more detail on the Evermode Institute itself.
Great. Well, thanks again, Brett, for the invitation to be on the show, and I hope that our conversation helps a lot of people who are watching and listening. So that's why we do this work, and that's why these things exist. So I'm really glad that your friend put us in touch, because as soon as I heard about what you're doing and then received your book, you kindly sent me your book. I did notice immediately that we are in fact farming or vine dressing neighboring plots in the vineyard. So that's great. And I think we'll probably talk about this later in the conversation, that the renewal of Catholic education is not the kind of thing that one person or one organization can do. We have to have different collaborators focusing on adjacent things if we're going to affect the renewal of Catholic education. So our little corner of the vineyard, our little plot, is the Evermode Institute. My confreres and I, we Norbertine canons regular, have been involved with Catholic education for a really long time, for about 900 years, actually. So, it's part of our order's history and tradition. the cathedral schools and the canonical chapters of the Middle Ages, which taught young men how to be clerics. That was the birthplace of what became the Catholic educational system in modern times. I personally had been working since basically the beginning of my priesthood. I've been a priest for 17 years. And for the first 14 years of that priesthood, I ran the seminary at our monastery in Southern California. So we have many vocations, thanks be to God. We have our own philosophy program. Of course, we have a novitiate. It takes a long time to be a Norbertine priest. And I was responsible, like the rector of a seminary, for running that program, putting together the curriculum. I was also the novice master. So my education work was with young men who are studying to become Norbertine priests and consecrated religious. While my confreres also, we ran a boarding school for about 60 years at the Abbey, a boys' boarding school. We have 2 parishes, both with Catholic grade schools. And then, as you said, at J. Sarah and other places, we serve as chaplains. So we run a co-ed high school, Catholic high school, parish high school, which is kind of unusual in America these days, in the Diocese of Los Angeles. So that's called Mary Star of the Sea High School, which is a Norbertine school. So all of us at St. Michael's Abbey and in our huge canonry are involved in some way in Catholic education. So as we continued to grow and grow, we built a new monastery that we moved into 5 years ago in Southern California. And as our kind of presence became more and more visible in the American church, especially, bishops began asking us, can you please come and start a house in my diocese? We want to, we had with all kinds of ideas about where we could serve in those dioceses. Can you hear the bell ringing, by the way?
Yes.
That's the Angelus bell. I'm missing Sexton and the Angelus for this conversation, which is just fine. So the bell tower is just right outside this room. So it's a monastery, which is wonderful.
It's a nice touch.
It is, yes. It kind of brings some of the monastic charm coming through online. So one of the bishops who had been courting our community for a long time is Bishop Paprocki of the Diocese of Springfield in Illinois. And he invited us in. It took several years to work on this. We were looking for a place to put down a new foundation, to start a new community affiliated with St. Michael's Abbey, to relieve some of the pressure of the great number of men in the monastery, ever-growing number of men in our monastery. And so 5 of us moved to Springfield, Illinois, and I was given the task by our abbot to open what we are calling the Evermode Institute, which is a project for the renewal of Catholic education. And our invitation from the Diocese of Springfield and the welcome of the bishop there basically gave us the fertile seed ground to grow this project, to beta test this project, and then to spread this project. So we've been at this work for about 3 years now. We're going into the 3rd year of our curriculum. It's a 4-year curriculum, and then it will expand beyond that. And before I tell you more specifically about what the Evermode Institute is, do you have any questions or places you'd like me to amplify that story so far, Brett?
Well, yeah. So let's go into the particulars of the programming in just a minute. But well, first of all, I did not know there was a Saint Evermode.
Yes.
I had thought this is an interesting name for an institute related to Catholic education, but I have no idea what it is. And just before we pressed the record button, when we were praying in this sort of invocations of the saints to pray for us, you mentioned Saint Evermode, and I said, okay, that's a story I need to know. So why don't you tell us who, the choosing of the name,
okay,
and then maybe a little bit of the history. You said you're going into the 3rd year of a 3-year program, but how did that, after the name of the saint, how did the program come about? What are the aims of the program? And then we can dig into some nuts and bolts there.
Very good. So Saint Evermode was one of the first followers of Saint Norbert of Xanten. So we Norbertines are named after our 12th century founder, Saint Norbert. As you noted when you introduced me, we're called officially the Order of Canons Regular of Praem, which is the suffix behind the name is O.Praem. that's our official Latin name, Ordinis Praemonstratensis. We are canons regular. That means we're priests who live like monks. We follow the rule of St. Augustine. St. Augustine wrote a rule in the 4th century for priests who live in common, whereas St. Benedict, his rule is for laymen who live in monasteries. The Benedictine life is mostly for lay monks, and there are some priests. Whereas the Augustinian life, the life of canons regular, is especially for clerics. And then there are also some lay brothers. So those are the two great rules in Western monasticism, the two ways of being a consecrated man in Latin Christianity. So we are representative of this ancient Augustinian way of priestly monastic life. And St. Norbert of Xantenen in 1121, part of the Gregorian Reform movement, was our second founder. So St. Augustine is our first founder. St. Norbert is our second founder, who was part of the renewal of the church through the renewal of the religious orders and especially the renewal of the clergy. One of St. Norbert's first followers was a man named Evermode, part of that first group who professed their religious life in 1121 in the Valley of Prémontré in France. And he was at St. Norbert's deathbed. By then, St. Norbert had become the Archbishop of Magdeburg in Germany. St. Evermode was sent with a wave of Norbertine canons to the edge of the Christian world and to evangelize the pagan Wends in North Germany, in the diocese, which became the Diocese of Ratzeburg in Germany. So St. Evermode was an evangelist, and he took as a mission a missionary bishop, taking the gospel to lands where it had never been preached before. So, and as I said, a close companion of St. Norbert, our Holy Father, St. Norbert. So when the Bishop of Springfield, Bishop Opraki, was inviting us in to renew the Catholic education program in his diocese, it was actually his idea. He had heard, and one of my confreres, Father Sebastian Walsh, they had been in communication, this idea that we are living in a new paganism in postmodernity, and that we need to be able to preach the gospel even to those who think they already know it, namely the educators in the Catholic educational program, teachers and administrators. And so St. Evermode is a good patron for this kind of work, preaching the gospel to pagan lands, because we have a kind of neo-paganism that we labor under in the post-Christian world. So he was the right Norbertine patron for this kind of renewal of Catholic education project. So that's the story about why Evermode is the name of the institute. So I hope he's more and more known because of our institute. He's a very interesting and beautiful 12th century saint.
Well, thank you. No, I'm glad to know that. And one thing that jumps out at me as you're describing the choice of name and the context is one of our themes at Making Every Class Catholic is that there's no neutral. If you think you're teaching math from a neutral point of view, I can give you a handful of diagnostic questions, like why should I study math, which is not a math question, that will start to uncover the layers of presuppositions you have about what human life is for and why we should do anything, why anything is worth our time. And pretty soon you'll realize you have a lot of presuppositions, and some of those might be Catholic and some of them might not be. And in the context as you describe it, a lot of our teachers, through no fault of their own, have some presuppositions from the broader culture that they're not even aware are presuppositions. And they may be a kind of, in certain cases, a kind of neo-pagan idea about this or that thing that they're not aware of holding, right? And this, by the way, teachers are not exceptional in this case. This is just people, Christians, right? And so learning to recognize the cultural presuppositions and then question whether or not those are in line with a Catholic worldview, and then how that might shape what we do in the classroom is a lot of what we do here. So I think that's the way you describe the context, it provides some interesting connections already between our two sort of fields of work. So,
yes.
And we'll circle back around to those connections, but tell us a little now, Father, about the particulars of the Evermode Institute. So you're invited in the first instance to one diocese in Springfield, and you start there, and we can talk a little more about how you might serve other dioceses here in a little bit. But the start is a 4-year program of formation for teachers. You mentioned that you're currently in the 3rd year, I believe.
Correct.
So tell us about where this idea for a 4-year program of formation for teachers comes from. What are the kind of priorities? What kind of formation are we talking about? What is appropriate to a lay person in a vocation like this? What are some of the themes or the structures? What does it look like if you were in this program?
Very good. So when we first embarked upon this project, I was appointed by the abbot to be the director of this program, to put it all together, to do my research, to deal with the school system in Springfield and the bishop and the teachers, and figure out what exactly are we going to do. And the first idea was, well, we Norbertines are really good at educating people in the faith in person. We're preachers, we're teachers, we're priests, obviously. So the first idea was that we would serve the Diocese of Springfield by inviting teachers and administrators to come to our priory for ongoing formation. And that was the first sort of goal for a regular program of catechetical and other formation at our priory in Springfield. What we realized was that very quickly, that because of the geographic size of the diocese, and also the fact that you know better than I do, that teachers are some of the busiest people in the world. They usually are married with a family, and they have work that doesn't end just at the end of the school day. That the last thing that they need is to drive an hour or more to another city to go to class on the weekend. And it would never work. So immediately we realized we're going to have to do this in some kind of an online vehicle, some sort of a learning management system online, supplemented by in-person days of recollection. So that was kind of our model right from the beginning. We're going to put together, first of all, launch a learning management system online, come up with a curriculum that is completely web-based, supplemented by, and first of all, also taught as much as we can by Norbertine priests, Norbertine canons. We want to be the ones giving the instruction for a number of reasons we can talk about if you're interested. And then supplementing that with some in-person spiritual nourishment through a day of recollection that every teacher administrator participates in person at our priory in Springfield. Okay, so putting together the curriculum, what the bishop and his staff and we realized was that, and again, you know this better than I do, until I started digging into the actual work of this curriculum. If a Catholic school is not Catholic from the ground up and from the top down, that is, if our holy faith doesn't permeate and inform every single facet of what happens in the school, from not just the mathematics classroom, and certainly not just the religion classroom, but to what is happening by way of the interface with the parish that is the sponsoring institution of the school, to how does the janitor who sweeps the floor understand his or her role as part of the Catholic ecosystem. So from the janitor to the teacher to the principal to the parents, then all of that is what's going to inform the students about what a Catholic worldview is and means. And the bishop realized, I think, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I'm going to paraphrase some of the conversations I had with him. Basically, if our schools are not authentically Catholic, why are they even open? Why are we trying to keep them open if they're not an authentically Catholic school? So basically, I think that, all of us at this point, anyone who works in Catholic education knows that we have failed for the last 2 generations to communicate the faith to the people who are coming up through our Catholic educational system and through our parish instruction. Basically, I would say the vast majority of teachers, administrators, and parents in the Catholic school system don't know the first thing about our holy religion. They don't understand why God made me. They don't understand what is the purpose of life from a Catholic worldview. So we're dealing with basic Christian anthropology. We're dealing with the most fundamentals of the purpose of life from a Christian worldview. much less what is sin? Why is there a problem? What is the solution to sin? Who is Jesus Christ? What is the church? What is revelation? What are the scriptures? So basically, everything that every Catholic should know, but doesn't. That's where we wanted to begin. And so in a way, it's not professional ongoing formation for educators so much as it is the formation of Catholic Christian human beings and how they can think about life, and then how they can think about their work, and then how they can think about their work in a Catholic education. So we decided that we're trying to build an edifice of an authentically Catholic school with people who have an authentic Catholic identity. And our program, our curriculum is imparting to all of those teachers and administrators and parents that full and authentic Catholic identity. That's our goal. That's very general.
Right.
But it's what we're trying to do. And it's what we're doing. It's what we're doing.
Couple thoughts. First, one word that was ringing in my head as you were speaking is culture. It almost feels to me like alongside building, Catholic individuals, Catholic and a Catholic worldview within is building up a culture, because to such a degree, it was, the metaphor in my head is something like, the boiling the frog, right? We maybe lived in a Catholic culture, more or less, to some degree. And then as elements of that start to slip away, you don't notice it happening. And then you get to a point where you turn around and you say, and teachers themselves will say, like, I don't know, like, you ask me to teach religion and I literally don't know where to start, right? And again, as I mentioned earlier, teachers aren't the only Christians in this position. This is most of us in contemporary culture. And so what you're describing is I see also happening across a whole range, whether it's the arts or business or wherever, you suddenly have Catholics saying, hold on a second, I woke up and I no longer fit in the world and I don't know exactly what happened. And people who invite me to speak, right? So I work on curriculum. Curriculum is an interesting place where for a long time you just don't ask the question.
Mm-hmm,
you just get the curriculum where you always got the curriculum. And as curriculum got less and less amenable to a Catholic worldview, and then you start running into, on this particular issue there's a thing, and on that particular issue there's a thing, and then you stop and you say, hold on, we need to actually start making our own curriculum kind of from the ground up with our own presuppositions. And curriculum is just one place where it happens, but there's a kind of cultural drift. And then there's I feel like, you talked about the renewal of Catholic education. I think at least part of how I would describe the renewal of Catholic education is like a recognition of how far we've drifted, and then a bunch of people saying we need to do something. And then it's interesting that your work and my work and lots of other great people and institutions have sensed something similar at the same time.
Yes.
Yeah.
There's a groundswell of interest and hope and work and effort from all different corners, it's so beautiful to see, which is I'm so glad that we connected. And there are other people from different corners of this project of renewal. I think that's absolutely right. The fact that you notice that curriculum is a place where God is calling you to make a difference, and we Norbertines feel called to make a difference at the level of the catechetical formation of the teachers and administrators. Those are different projects. They're obviously very connected, but not every institution or not every person or not every organization can do everything. We need both the catechetical formation and the cultural building up of the Catholic cultural identity of the people involved, and that trickles down into the culture of the school. We need someone working on what that looks like in the classroom, as far as how are we approaching the teaching of students in the classroom from that place of a Catholic worldview, and what curriculum can we bring to the table there. We need the books and the materials. That's like the publishing world part of that. So there are many different. We need. I could list a dozen places where there's a need. What about where do we find teachers, new teachers, to hire? Where do we find new principals and headmasters and school leaders to hire to fill these roles who have this formation in this worldview? Where do we find pastors in the parishes who believe deeply in the mission of the Catholic school as part of the parish mission? Where do we, so, and so forth. There are many pieces of this puzzle. And I think that the only way it can work is if the right people are attending to the right pieces, and then we put those pieces together in the context of this or that school or this or that diocese, and we watch it all come together. We watch the picture start to form as the pieces are assembled. And I'm seeing that happen, Brett. It's a really beautiful thing. And we have to be very patient in that, but we also have to be very sort of ruthless in our unwillingness to cave in to the cultural drift. So part of that comes from the most teachers, if they're trained teachers, they're trained in the very secular, materialist, atheistic, Dewey model of education that goes all the way back to the Prussian model of the 19th century. And it's very difficult to convince a teacher trained like that in his or her own education as how to be a good teacher, that they have to look beyond their silo of math or science or even religion, that they have to look, that it's not about quantifiable statistics of test scores and desks in rows and that kind of militaristic Prussian thing about the Prussian model was to form soldiers for the Prussian army. That was how education was envisioned. And we've been living with that ever since. And it's not really a model of education with the well-being of the human person, the dignity of the human person in each and every student in view. It's a much more transactional and assembly line factory model of education. So again, that's a whole tangent that we could get off on. That's not what Catholic education is, and nor has it ever been that. We need to return to the idea of a much deeper care for the dignity of the human person, and especially the salvation of his or her soul. What is Catholic education for? It's for the salvation of souls. It's not so that your 8th grader will get the right test scores to get into high school. And it's not so that that your seniors pass the AP exams in the American model and get into the best university. That's not what education is for. That's important. They need to learn math and science and religion and everything else. But where Catholic education is for the salvation of souls. And so if we're not forming disciples of Jesus Christ, if we're not solicitous for their spiritual well-being with attendance at Holy Mass and frequenting the sacraments, and for the conversion of those students in the school who are not already Catholics, if that's not the first goal of the math teacher and the physical ed, the PE teacher, instructor, and if that's not the first goal of the janitor and the cook in the kitchen, then we're not actually about the project of Catholic education.
Right. Let me make one comment, and then I want to follow up on your earlier suggestion that we talk about why the Norbertines want to be sort of front and center in the catechetical project. But just a quick comment first. I had a guest on the podcast before who's one of these people doing great work in a neighboring plot, Elizabeth Sullivan,
Yes.
from the Institute for Catholic Liberal Education. And that episode was about what happens to teachers when they are introduced to a different way of teaching. You know, in what you described as the Prussian model, that sort of thing. And what, in very short scope, what they find is a kind of freedom, right? Teachers actually don't get into teaching to do what the Prussian model or its successors do, and they find it limiting. And you find teachers naturally, as something gets over bureaucratized or over statisticalized, I don't even know if that's a word, but you know what I mean? If everything is available as discrete measurements, right? Teaching to the test, all that kind of stuff, teachers naturally resist it. And it feels an imposition on their art. And they become reduced to fact distribution machines, you know? And when they are given another possibility for what their pedagogy can look like that feels so human. They actually feel freed to do the thing that they thought they were signing up for in the first place because they love kids and they want what's good for kids, right? So I point people to that episode and just to make that connection also with another great project in the Vineyard kind of thing.
Yes, she's excellent, and that project is excellent. That Institute for Catholic Liberal Education is just great. So
yeah, and they've been in this Vineyard longer than most of us.
It's true.
Your 900 years notwithstanding. But the follow-up question I wanted to say, as you're describing, we need different people with different charisms called to different work. Maybe that's worth exploring then why it's particularly valuable to have a religious community doing the particular kind of work that you're doing. I'm a layman, and I think there's particular value in having a layman do the kind of work I'm doing. Not that a priest couldn't be good at it, but there is some value there. I share a lot of common experience with the teachers of family life, and I was trained as a teacher, all that kind of stuff, right? So in your particular work at the Evermode Institute, you mostly want, whenever possible, a Norbertine front and center in the video, leading the recollection, doing what you do. What is the particular charism and what function? I hesitate to use the word function, but it's what's coming to mind right now. Within the broader organism of the church, what is the role that is particular to the Norbertines or to religious life more generally, and how does that map onto the project of, let's say, catechetical and then personal and cultural formation? Very
good. That's a great question, Brett. The one thing I think we've lost in postmodern Catholic life in the West is the clear understanding of the hierarchical organization of the church. A priest shouldn't do everything, and a consecrated religious shouldn't do everything, even as a layman or a laywoman shouldn't do everything in the church. But we should do what we're called to do excellently, as well as we can. Priests are ordained into the teaching ministry of Christ in a particular way. Christ is priest, prophet, and teacher. And a priest is ordained, he's configured by his priestly ordination into a life of acting in the person of Christ through the sacraments as priest, prophet, and teacher. And if our corner in the Evermode Institute is especially the catechetical formation, the Catholic worldview formation of teachers and administrators and parents, that's priestly work par excellence. The priest is not just, if a teacher is not just a factory-like distributor of facts, a priest is not merely a factory-like distributor of sacraments. The priest gives the absolution in the confessional and confects the Holy Eucharist. A priest is much more than merely that. He is also he represents the teaching office of Jesus Christ in the parish, which is why a pastor needs to understand his role in the Catholic school in his parish like that. He's the father and teacher and pastor of the school. And so it's important that this particular kind of formation of catechetical formation of the demographics that we're serving, teachers, administrators, parents, that's priestly work. So I think that's important. Now, lay people can do that too, and sometimes they're more applied to that work than a priest is because they decide that that's the job I'm going to do in the church, and they're really good at it. But it doesn't bring with it that unction, that grace, that sacramental character that comes along with the ordained ministry. Religious life in the church serves a role of witness and model. So in the classic Catholic worldview, everybody understands him or herself to be called to live the evangelical counsels of poverty, chastity, and obedience according to his or her state in life. We religious profess it by vow. I'm a vowed celibate, poor man, and obedient person to my abbot, obedient man. But every man and woman in the church is called to exercise those virtues of evangelical simplicity, of chastity according to his or her state in life. So a married man or a married woman is also called to be chaste. That is, they don't reach outside the bounds of holy matrimony for their emotional and sexual expression of their life. And also they're obedient to the church and to the government and to each other in marriage and so forth. So the religious show the whole church, the consecrated religious like myself, we're supposed to show the whole church what the Christian life looks like in its kind of essence, so that then people can imitate that to the degree that they're able in their state in life. So to have a consecrated religious and a priest that is Norbertines like myself doing this kind of work online for people to watch those videos, learn this, it's not just about the facts. It's also about that model and example that comes with religious consecration and that sacramental grace and the overflow of that comes along with priestly ordination. So I don't know if that's too complicated an answer to your very good question.
No, I hadn't heard the idea before, and it makes intuitive sense that the consecrated life, even if you think about what the word consecration even means, it makes sense that it's a kind of model of something in its essence that is lived out in its particularities by different people in different ways according to their state in life, but that there's a kind of a distillation of its essence that can be seen with a kind of clarity within an individual or a community that's living according to these counsels.
It's why we wear a religious habit, for example, because we are a public witness to the world and to the church of what this is. I can't hide my religious consecration. My vows are public vows, so you have to see me wearing this habit because it's you have the right as a Catholic layman to see the consecrated religious in the church because you need to see them. We're supposed to remind you of the heavenly life. We're supposed to remind you of this kind of distillation of baptismal consecration, which is also yours, so that you can live it to the degree that God is calling you to live it. You need to see these signs in the religious and as you said, the religious community. I'm sorry, I interrupted you, but it's a public witness.
Right. No, that was very helpful for me. And as I think about the particular role of the formation of teachers, of course, there's all kinds of formation of teachers that can go on, and lay people have a great contribution to be made there. And I think, if some people are nervous that this way of speaking might exclude lay people, I would almost flip the script and say, like, I don't think anyone thinks lay people don't have a role to play here, or you probably wouldn't be talking to me. But to actually watch for the inverse danger, to say, like, well, if the consecrated life does not have that role, or if it could be done just as well by anybody else, then we're actually saying the reverse, right? We're saying there's no role for the consecrated life, or at least no irreplaceable role. Sure, Father Ambrose might be good at the same kinds of things that Brett is good at, and so they could be kind of interchangeable pieces. But that's not what we mean, right? We actually mean that there's a particular role, and that's not, I think our modern view or postmodern view is to think that that's somehow limiting, when in fact, experientially, when you actually try live it, it's actually freeing.
Absolutely.
And I think when teachers will encounter then the consecrated religious and know that they are collaborators with that without being interchangeable with that, it should be a freeing experience for them in their own vocation, rather than this kind of limiting. I find the same dynamic. Well, this is a very interesting parallel, maybe, because you're talking about how this shows up in different ways in different states of life. I find a very similar dynamic in marriage, in fact, that when we think of ourselves, if husbands and wives think of ourselves as interchangeable pieces, life gets very complicated. If we actually understand our complementary roles, not in a way that's super restrictive and like based on false stereotypes and all that other kind of stuff, but in a way that actually reflects the way we live together and our relationships with our children and our relationship with the broader world, we actually find much more freedom than if we think about ourselves as interchangeable pieces,
Right.
Anyway.
Oh yeah, that's right. Well, that of course, that has its roots in the wicked origins of feminism and everything else in the cultural West. I mean, you're absolutely right. I love the fact that you bring to bear the married state and the complementarity of the sexes in marriage and in culture as an example that's a little bit more readily available to this complementarity of the consecrated life and the lay state in the church. It's absolutely true. And anybody who's ever seen an excellent Catholic school, wherever our viewers and listeners are living, if I can almost promise that there will be consecrated religious involved in it. It's usually the sisters, right? I'm right now at our abbey in Southern California, which is where we're having this, where I'm on my side of the conversation, and I'm not in the Midwest at the moment. But the wonderful Carmelite sisters of the Sacred Heart here in Southern California, who do amazing work in Catholic education, their schools are some of the finest Catholic schools in the country. And it's this beautiful harmony of lay leadership and lay teachers and so forth, with a salt and peppering of consecrated sisters in the classroom and sometimes in the administration. It's just so beautiful to see that the way that works well when you have all of that brought together, those states in life brought together. Yeah.
I've seen in my travels, I've been at a lot of schools speaking, and there is I hadn't thought about this a lot. Well, I'd thought about it as like, these are great people and it's good to have great people, but I hadn't thought of it so much in terms of the complementarity of the consecrated and the lay vocations. But as I reflect on it, I'm thinking of a handful of schools where I've been where they get this balance right. And it's not, I mean, there's a certain minimum number. Like if you don't have one, then you don't have any, right? But it's not really about numbers. Like a small, you said salt and peppering, a small sort of cohort from a religious community that can kind of imbue the imagination and the culture of a given school with a charism in which the lay administrators and the lay teachers are full participants. Is really a beautiful thing. And I don't know how many schools, I mean, this is your experience with bishops, I think you said courting your order. Same thing with schools. I've worked with there's a lot of young Dominican sisters doing this work, including at J. Sarah.
Yes.
And schools and bishops all over North America are just begging them to come. And so one thing to add to, it was already kind of implied in your list of things, but you said there were 12 or 15 other things you could say. Prayer for vocations to these communities that are sending workers out to the vineyard.
Yes.
And, it's I'm sure a lot of people, when they heard you say that how your community is bursting at the seams. And I was with the Dominican Sisters of Mary, Mother of the Eucharist in Michigan, and they're doing the same thing. And, if you could get 2 in a school, it would be a transformative kind of experience. And so obviously the lay teacher is going to predominate in terms of numbers. That's the place we are in the culture right now. But to even think of this salt and peppering, if you could get 2 or 3 sisters or brothers or a combination from some of these orders that are really committed to Catholic education, it is very often transformative for the school.
One thing we thought, so that's another long way of, that just comes back, circling back to the Evermode Institute. We provide that a little taste of that in the schools and dioceses where we are spreading, where our institute is spreading into. So if a teacher or an administrator or a parent is watching about 4 hours of video content per semester over the space of 4 years, they're going to get to know the Norbertine charism because they're seeing me and my confreres on the screen in our video classes, at least 4 or 5 hours a semester. And that's something, that's not nothing. So even in a school or a diocese where there's not a great preponderance of consecrated religious in the classroom or in the school, we provide a little bit of that salt and peppering from afar, as it were, in this online world, this virtual world that we can all live and move in now. So,
right. Well, let me as we sort of move, I guess, towards the end. We're not in a rush yet, but we're about 40 minutes in. I wanted to spend a little time, and I think this is a great transition point, to think about the intersection of your work and the work of catechetical formation more generally, and the work we do here at Making Every Class Catholic, which is training teachers to think about the particularity of their subject area, their disciplines, their specialization from a Catholic worldview. And let me start with this. One of the common objections that people who do what I do get when we present this idea to Catholic educators is, look, I'm just a math teacher. I'm not a theologian. I'm not the chaplain. I'm not the theology teacher. I'm just the football coach. I hear this line, I'm just the, even you mentioned the janitor. I've had actually really interesting encounters with maintenance and janitorial staff around this, because they'll sometimes I'll do a presentation for a whole division or diocese, and they'll invite all the staff, secretarial, janitorial, and we have to think these things through. And sometimes there's really beautiful kind of breakthroughs that happen when these people start to see their role in the mission of the church and the school. But there is this idea, I'm just the.
Yes.
And therefore, I'm not qualified. I'm not qualified to make the connections in math or science or health that you can make because you're a theologian. And one of the things I have to say is, and so this is where it's going to start intersecting with your work. I have to say two things at the same time. I have to say, on the one hand, learning more about your faith is always good. And don't let me stop you. Please, by all means, learn more about your faith. As a Catholic, you don't need to be a theologian, but all of us are called to deepen our faith and our knowledge of the faith. On the one hand. And on the other hand, we're not going to actually start a school where we hire 25 theologians. Mm-hmm. We're going to hire teachers who are specialists in their discipline. We don't need you to be a theologian. We need you to be a physics teacher. And in fact, the physics teacher who knows physics is better able to make certain kinds of connections with faith than I, the theologian, am, because they know their area better than I do. But what I'm able to offer them is a set of questions and frames and lenses, because they haven't been trained to think about physics as it relates to other questions in life. Even the question of, as you put it, the salvation of souls. Nobody, when they studied to be a physics teacher, virtually nobody, I shouldn't say nobody, but virtually nobody was taught to think, how does teaching kids physics relate to the salvation of souls? But once I introduce those kinds of questions, the physics teacher is better placed to make the connection sometimes than I am, even though I have a PhD in theology. And so I want to affirm for the teacher, we need your expertise. We need teachers to teach. Theologians are handy once in a while, but we don't need thousands of them going into our schools and becoming physics teachers. We need physics teachers. And so it's an interesting balancing act. On the one hand, I want to say you don't need to be a theologian. And on the other hand, I want to say growth in knowledge of your faith is always good. And then I want to say, and I want your expertise in physics or whatever the particular thing is, and I want you to become better at seeing the intersection between those things, because when you start to do that, you're better able to do it than I am.
Yes.
And so anyway, that's a bit of a ramble, but that's the context I find when I'm doing my work. And I wonder how that sounds to you as someone who's working explicitly on the catechetical formation for the physics teacher and every other teacher,
yes.
and how those things relate to one another.
I think that so we're looking at, you and I look at this at, again, I don't want to frame it so much as a problem, but I'll say it as the problem of how we impart an authentic and full-bodied Catholic worldview to a school and to every classroom in that school. That's not so much a problem as an opportunity and an invitation. And we're looking at that you're looking at it from the perspective of the actual classroom and eventually the curriculum and the mindset of the teacher, be it a math or physics or PE teacher. I'm looking at it from the perspective of the same circumstance there, from the perspective of what will trigger that aha moment in the soul of that instructor, so that they will then begin to ask the questions that you're helping them to ask. What is that? What is that catalyst that sets off the chain reaction of a new modus operandi in the classroom? I think it's the thirst for holiness. I think that it's when we can wake up every teacher and administrator in the school and janitor and parent when we'll use the physics instructor because that's the one that you brought up. When the physics teacher wakes up to the fact that he or she is called to holiness and greatness in Jesus Christ, that I'm not just a physics teacher, I'm a saint in the making. I'm called to greatness. I'm a beloved daughter of God. I'm called to live my professional life as a physics teacher in the school as a pathway to my sanctification and the sanctification of the whole world through my Christian life. Because that's true for every single person. That's true for every single person. There is no little life. There is no, I'm just a ... No, there is, I am first a beloved son of God, a beloved daughter of God. And that being a child of God and called to greatness means I'm called to holiness. And so therefore my work as a physics teacher is an expression of my identity as a saint. That's our goal. We instructors in the Norbertine, Evermode Institute. We're trying to wake that up. We're trying to awaken that in the school, in every person in the school, because that's true for every Christian, right? And that could apply to every business or every profession or every corner of culture. And somehow, I'm not quite sure why, well, it's because of the fall, Christians have forgotten that. So people think I get up in the morning and I go and I teach my physics because that's all I know. That's what I do. I'm just a physics teacher. But actually, our holy faith and our baptism and the sacraments we receive as Catholic Christians gives us this motivation, and that is the awakening to the greatness that is ours. And so the realization that there is no such thing as a little life. I'm just a ... That's kind of our goal. And that comes along with the witness of religious consecration. It comes along with the unction of priestly ordination. And especially, I think that it's like there's I think a tipping point in schools when you get enough people who wake up to their discipleship, wake up to their identity as sons and daughters of God, as followers of Jesus Christ, saints in the making, and then evangelists, people who want to spread that gospel freedom. There's a tipping point. And once the school starts to just light on fire with the right way about going about Catholic education. You've probably seen it. I've seen it.
Yeah, well, a couple things I've seen that relate to your insights there. The first is there are teachers who do what I'm trying to train people to do without knowing that they're doing it. And it's people who tick the boxes that you described. When they have that vision of themselves, the church, the world, God, then it becomes obvious to them how teaching math fits in that role. And they almost don't need my training because it's second nature. And what I find in my work is then you'll have other people, sincere Christians of goodwill, who are committed to the mission of Catholic education, but have never been given a sense of how that relates to teaching physics or whatever the thing is, who with 2 or 3 diagnostic questions, and I see it happen literally in real time, will tip over from, I teach science on the one hand, and then I go to church on the other hand, and I don't see how those are related. I've seen like the external processors in the small groups literally talk themselves into that position and watch the people around them as their eyes grow big as they do it, right? And so like that's a great grace that I'm able to see in my work. And there's a story, I may have shared this on the podcast before. This one didn't happen in front of my eyes. It was a school I was working with in Indianapolis. And I met with them in September. And the 2 administrators who were really taking the lead on this worked with the staff throughout the year. And they emailed me in like April or May. And they said, we know we made progress because there was like this crusty old math teacher who was not going to say things to make us feel good because that's what he does, And he came up to us after one of our meetings near the end of the year, and he said, when we started this, I would have just said, this isn't my job. And now I think it's my job, or so, something to that. And I'm like, yes, like that's that moment, that insight. And so I think that you can do the catechetical foundational work in a way that doesn't necessarily. Now, maybe in the fourth year, you have something specific where you have some way of thinking through what this means for your particular discipline, right? Mm-hmm. Maybe that's a last semester kind of thing. But even without that, if you introduce the foundational work, what you're going to introduce is more and more opportunities for connection, right? So as someone has their expertise in whatever their field is, and they're thinking about this other thing, the image in my mind is you just have more hooks to hang things on. As you mount the hooks on the wall, oh, well, this actually goes there. Like this view of the galaxy and the beauty of the galaxy and the human person's role as stewards of creation and our relationship with knowledge and the physical universe and all this kind of stuff. Oh, I actually have a vocation within creation that is unique. And there's no other creature I've ever encountered that even does science. I'm that kind of a thing. And God made me that way and gave me a role in the universe for some end, right? And science is somehow implicated in that in a way that it's not implicated for oak trees and giraffes. So what kind of a creature am I that I do science? And if you've thought about the final goal of the human person, and you've thought a lot about the beauty and order of the natural universe, you don't need me to make the connection for you.
Right.
It's
right.
going to start to become intuitive.
Right. Yeah, it's I think one of the frustrations that I found and my confreres and I have found in the work we've been in this project, as I said, beta testing it with the Diocese of Springfield. One of the challenges has been whether it's your work in the corner of the renewal that you're working on, or in our corner of the renewal we're working on, you almost want to be able to say everything at once. It's like you pull that thread and you want to be able to impart this whole thing, like it's the catechetical formation, and then it's going to trickle down in the pedagogy in your classroom, and here's how it looks, and here's how it works, and then you find the right principal, and then you hire the right teacher, and it's almost like you want to see the whole thing flower all at once, because you and I, and those who are interested in this project, we see what's possible, and you can't do it all together instantaneously. I mean, God can do that because he's powerful like that. So we sort of, we roll up our sleeves and we get about the work of, okay, we're going to have a 4-year curriculum of catechetical formation. You're going to write a book and then have these in-services and like do the actual hard work of walking that crotchety old math teacher man that you described through, and then his principal or his headmaster, whoever is going to like follow up. And then finally the light's going to turn on at some point. But you and I, and you and people who work with us and like us, we want to just like reach inside someone's chest and flip the switch, or reach inside the school and flip the switch, and like everything just comes together because it can, when in fact we have to be very patient, right? We have to do what we can with a ton of hope and a ton of joy and real confidence that all of this can happen, and then let the Holy Spirit do his work. I've seen in the in-service days of recollection in the Springfield Diocese, every teacher and administrator, they come for at least one of these days. We have them regularly through the year, and it's all scheduled out. It's beautiful. But, the first year, a good percentage of that population came in like this, arms folded, like, you're not going to tell me anything that I want to hear today, And I knew that would happen. Of course that's going to happen. Teachers are busy. They don't want to go for an in-service, or even if you call it a day of recollection, they're like, look, this is not, I didn't sign up for this. I'm not getting paid for this or whatever, right? 3 years later, there's a lot less of that arm folded scowling. You don't have anything I want to say. You're not going to say anything I want to hear. The gospel, the truth of the gospel and the freedom and salvation that comes through Jesus Christ is beautiful and attractive. And the truth will set you free, And I've watched it happen too. You see that softening of the heart and the turning the corner to a Catholic worldview that means, wow, I really can be a real servant in the kingdom here and help God save souls in my math classroom or on the football field or in the lunchroom. It works. But we have to be very patient, Brett, and we have to, I think the collaboration is really helpful, and also then modeling that hope and joy and freedom of the sons and daughters of God. It works.
Right. Well, as we come to the 1 hour mark, I think this is a great time to note that since we first connected, we have found that several dioceses that are working with one of us is working with the other of us. Yes. And so that's a beautiful thing, because we recognize that we're not competition, we're complementary.
Absolutely.
And I'll get the question, how are we supposed to do this with teachers who don't have basic formation? And I have to say, on the one hand, of course we want basic formation, and I also have to say, on the other hand, don't let that stop you. Like you're not there. There are always next steps you can take. We can do something. We're not like completely bankrupt, because there's other things to do. So we have to. It's very common to get questions that are stuck in this trap that say, well, if we can't do all the things, how do we do any of the things? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And we have to be able to say, like, and I want to even reflect on the Gospels here. Like, I don't know how many parables there are about like one person, sows and the other one reaps, or you plant a bunch of seeds and not all of them come to fruition. And like Jesus was pretty aware of this dynamic. And if you even watch, the way he has to work with his disciples over the course of years and how they don't get it. And, and then you see Paul writing to the Corinthians and you're like, you think you have a rough congregation, like, this is not new. The incarnation is an affirmation of the fact that we are in history and things don't happen all at once. Yes. Right? Jesus grew in wisdom and knowledge. He didn't spring fully formed from the head of Yahweh the way Athena did from Zeus. Right? It's an affirmation of the order of creation, and the fact that it takes place in time. And that perfection is not available to us until the end.
Right.
We're gonna be in, traditional language, you might call it this valley of tears or whatever. We're not gonna get all the way where we want to go in our time and place, but there will be real goods that are achieved when we conform ourselves to the will of God.
Yes,
and make our sincere effort. And
there's always a good next step. There's always a good next step. And we walk toward that perfection and toward that growth one step at a time. So like you said, we don't have to be able to do all the things. Just take the next best step.
Right, yeah. Right. I share that when young people, and you would know much more about this than I do, but when young people ask me about discerning a vocation, whether it's to religious life, marriage, or whatever, they often imagine it as a sort of ideal thing that happens at some point in the future, and you'll wake up one morning and you'll know. Mm-hmm. And that virtually never happens. Mm-hmm. But what does happen is something will happen today where you can discern God's will and you can choose to cooperate with it or work against it. And that's how you're going to find a wife or a religious community or a husband, or like, that's how it works. Is you will make a step today.
Yes.
where it's not an abstract question of God's will for your life. It's a concrete, specific, practical question of God's will for your life. And if you keep taking those steps, the question of religious life or marriage or whatever are going to resolve along that path. They don't exist independently in some ether that is timeless. And so that, I mean, my wife talks about this a lot, about just being stuck in time and how she resists being stuck in time. She wants to read Augustine's Confessions because it's got a whole chapter on the nature of time and being, all that kind of stuff. But this is, we're made for eternity. We desire the perfect. That's good. And also we live in time, and we won't achieve the perfection of eternity in time. But we will make real steps in that direction, right? And so, anyway, I got too theological there, but anyway,
that's great. It's beautiful. I love you're preaching it, preach it, brother, and I'm here for it.
So let's get very practical. Next steps. Okay. If people want to do this kind of work in their dioceses, in their schools. Presumably, my audience knows they can reach out to me, but let's tell them how they can get in touch with you if they want to learn more about what the Evermode Institute could do for their schools.
Great. Hop on our landing page, discoverevermode.com. Discoverevermode.com. Maybe you can share a link or something. It's just Discover Evermode is EVERMODE.com. And they will find information, ways of reaching out, emailing me, and so forth. And yes, I would love to hear from principals in schools, pastors in parishes, ideally dioceses, whole dioceses. So we're doing all of those things, collaborations with all of those entities, parishes, schools, and dioceses.
Excellent. And I would just say to anyone who's been to any of my work and has said, how do we do this if we don't have basic catechetical formation? Here you go. And if people working with you want to say, I'd really love to drill down on what this means, particularly in phys ed or physics or, grade 4 math or whatever it is, that's what we do here at Making Every Class Catholic. So it's a delight to chat with you today, Father Ambrose, and to share with the audience some of the work you're doing and how it relates to what we do here. So thank you so much for being with me.
Thank you. God bless you. Thanks, Brett. Peace.
Amen. Thank you. And everyone, thank you so much for joining us this month for the Making Every Class Catholic podcast. We'll see you in a month. God bless. Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed today's episode, I want to tell you about the Making Every Class Catholic online community. There you'll have access to regular live interactions with me and with plenty of great presenters and presentations, workshops, and Q&A, as well as to a network of committed Catholic educators and a growing library of resources. And be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and most important of all, share this with a fellow Catholic educator. We've got more exciting guests lined up in the months to come. You won't want to miss them. Until then, God bless you in your work, making every class Catholic.